Welcome everyone to our World Soil Day panel titled Climate Change, the Soil Carbon Solution. My name is Ryland Englehart and I'm the co-founder of Kiss the Ground as well as the executive director and the producer of the recently released Kiss the Ground feature-length documentary released on Netflix. I also live on a 17-acre organic regenerative farm in Fillmore, California, and it's my great honor and joy to be moderating this panel today. First, I want to thank and welcome everybody. First, I want to thank all of our amazing panelists for joining this amazing panel, and thanking the Rodale Institute for hosting this really important conversation. I also would love to invite everybody tuning in from around the country and around the world, if you just want to put in the chat where you're tuning in from, so we know where everyone is tuning in from. That would be great. As the panel goes on and you have questions that arise, you can just put those in the Q&A tab at the bottom, and we will try to answer the majority of them at the end. Today's panel is going to be about an hour. It's going to be an hour and a half, so we're going to have enough time to really dive in to this critically important conversation in hopes that we can really understand and assimilate this beautiful and important conversation. Firstly, before we get to introducing our panelists, I just want to speak to World Soil Day. Where does it come from? World Soil Day is United Nations recognized an international day to recognize the importance of healthy soil. And each year it has a distinct campaign, and this year and today's campaign is called Keep Soil Alive, Protect Soil Biodiversity. So at a high level, why is soil so important? So 95% of what we eat comes from soil. It's the living skin of the earth, and it's the basis for all life on land. Soil also contains 25% of the total global biodiversity. And why is soil being threatened? Agriculture has degraded 1/3 of the world's soils. The United Nations says that we have less than 60 years left of farmable topsoil remaining. In the US alone, we're losing up to 4 tons of topsoil per acre per year. So today, personally, is a big deal for me. 8 years ago, I sat in an audience panel discussion much like this one, and that panel discussion changed my life forever. I learned that there was a real pathway forward for how humanity could actually balance our climate, and that we could have life on this planet 7 generations forward. And that very panel was the thing that inspired Kiss the Ground, the organization, and the film. So it's a real honor to be here today and to be moderating this amazing panel, and to really understand that the Rodale white paper that was just released, called the Regenerative Agriculture Soil Carbon Solution, and this panel today can give us the understanding and the confidence that the soil carbon solution is real and possible. So may today's panel awaken hearts and minds to the possibility of regeneration. So let's hear from farmers, ranchers, scientists, brands, policymakers on how we can all participate in moving the needle towards a brighter future with the soil carbon solution. I'd love to get into some introductions to our amazing panelists, starting with Marshall Johnson, who serves as the Vice President of the National Audubon Society, Dakota, and for the past decade has been working to build rural and urban community-focused habitat and ecosystem programs. His work impacts upwards of 2,300,000 acres of rangeland, and Marshall strives to bring conservation into the 21st century. Chellie Pingree is a US Congresswoman from Maine's 1st District. She became an organic farmer on the small island of North Haven, Maine in the 70s. she is a vocal advocate for food policy reform, and her leadership contributed to the 2018 Farm Bill, doubling funding for organic research, and added the first federal produce prescription program with permanent funding. We also have Alex Pryor, who is the co-founder and board member of Guayaki Yerba Mate, born and raised in Argentina, and has 25 years experience with indigenous knowledge, international business, food science, and natural resource management in agroecology. We also have Dr. Andrew Smith, Rodale's chief institute scientist, responsible for farm operations and research and activities at the Rodale Institute. He also owns a 140-acre organic farm with his wife where they raise sheep, grow fiber, fruit crops, and manage a seed-to-share garden program, as well as additional educational programming. Lastly, we have Tom Newmark, who is the co-founder and board chair of the Carbon Underground, and also the co-founder of the Soil Carbon Initiative, and is the co-owner of Finca Luna Nueva Lodge, a farm and eco lodge in the mountain rainforest of Costa Rica that teaches regenerative agriculture. Wow, that was a lot to communicate, and I'm so glad that I get to pass my questions on to some of our amazing panelists now. Let's jump in with our first question for Dr. Smith. The Rodale Institute recently released a white paper called the Regenerative Agriculture Soil Carbon Solution. Can you tell us more about that paper and what the science says about regenerative agriculture's role in this climate crisis? Thank you so much, Drew.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ryland. Thank you and Kiss the Ground for bringing attention to the importance of soil health. And it's great that we actually have Soil Health Day, right? We've been talking about soil health for a long time, and scientists have known the benefit of soil that has higher levels of carbon for the benefit it has to food production. But recently, with the climate crisis, there's been much greater attention to how we might actually, putting more carbon or taking carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil could be a solution to the climate crisis. And we now have some pretty good science to show that that's a possibility. In our white paper, we've looked, and it was really just a review. It wasn't new analysis of data, but review of the scientific literature. And a lot of studies have now been able to track over time changes in carbon in the soil and start to be able to make an estimate of how much carbon we could sequester or draw down from out of the atmosphere. And so we looked at some studies that have looked at crop patterns, and when we shift from a conventional form of agriculture to a regenerative or organic form of agriculture. And what was probably new since our last white paper that was released in 2014 is greater knowledge on the benefits of pasture and rangeland management for sequestering carbon if managed properly with things like adaptive grazing. So that was really a gap in knowledge about 6 years ago or so when the first paper came out. And it's really exciting to see some new studies that really show a tremendous ability for grazing and pasture management when done right to put more carbon into the soil. But one thing I think that's also interesting that might be, it's a little bit hidden in the white paper is the kind of a new paradigm or new hypothesis that's telling us that the benefit of microbes and microbial diversity in the soil for forming long-term stable forms of carbon. It was always thought that was really plants that drove that. And plants do drive it because they're taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and put it into the soil. But we're seeing that it's microbes that might be playing the biggest role. And we've throughout, a major part of that paper was showing the highlights of improved soil biodiversity or below ground biodiversity and above ground biodiversity. So we're really learning scientifically is these practices that improve the biodiversity in the soil will have tremendous benefit for increasing soil carbon sequestration.
Beautiful. Drew, one follow-up question. So in the paper, is there a summation of what it would take as far as the adoption or the percent of adoption around the world to regenerative organic or some regenerative practices of management to play the significant role that we need it to help mitigate and balance our climate? Was there any kind of, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. You know, for us, it was a thought experiment. You know, we took a look at, we had multiple studies that showed different levels of soil carbon sequestration over, you know, somewhat short periods of time. We took some exemplary studies in cropping systems and exemplary studies in grazing management systems. And we were able to show that if we were to, start regenerative organic agriculture over the entire globe, institute that tomorrow, we'd have the potential to sequester more than 100% of the carbon dioxide that is emitted through other means right now. So that's why we think that regenerative agriculture is it's a scalable and it's the solution that's ready today to go to have a potential to draw down carbon. And maybe I'll talk about it a little bit later, but that was the drawdown 100% of carbon dioxide, but not total greenhouse gas emissions. So I think a little bit more data is necessary, and probably from other different farming systems around the world and different habitats to be able to really truly say that with some clarity.
Got it. My next question, I'll pass it over to Tom, who you also played a role in writing or helping supporting with that white paper. Can you speak specifically what regenerative agricultural practices you're using and practicing on Finca Luna Nueva Lodge in Costa Rica, and what are the benefits that you've seen firsthand?
Ryland, thank you for the invitation to be on this panel. And I thank Drew and the folks at Rodale for taking the lead with your extraordinary new white paper. I was very happy to be associated with that. But rather than telling you what I do at my farm, I thought I would show you. So if I can accomplish the screen share, and you'll let me know when I've done that. Are you seeing it?
That's great.
Good. So this is my farm, Finca Luna Nueva. It's in the volcanic highlands on the Caribbean slope of Costa Rica. And this is what my land wants to be. We've been rainforest since we rose up out of the ocean to create the Panamanian land bridge 3 to 5 million years ago. And as far as the eye can see from my farm, and this is literally a view from my farm out to the Arenal volcano, it's rainforest. It's always been rainforest. It wants to be rainforest, but we're farmers. So with the vanity or the need of humans working with the ecosystem, we decided to convert that ecosystem into our organic turmeric and ginger farm. Now, it was a beautiful little farm, and it was certified organic from the beginning. We've never been anything other than an organic farm. And you can see the rainforest is right there at the edge of our farming system. But here we were planting a monoculture of, in this case, turmeric in straight rows. And as a result of that, we had great yields in the very beginning years, but we subsequently found that our yields were collapsing because of fusarium, because of this fungal blight in the soil that was wiping us out. So we then talked to Jim Fulmer, who was then the head of Demeter USA, and we were also biodynamically farming. We were Demeter certified. And Jim advised us to go listen to the field, to go listen to the organism of our farm, and the farm would tell us how to deal with this disease that was afflicting us. And the field, in fact, told us, the farm, kind of mystically, if you can just play along with me, the idea that the farm has a personality and a consciousness. And we heard from the farm, don't plant me in rows, plant me in mounds. And the mounds, we hoped, and perhaps we heard, would disrupt the conduit, the current, the transmission of the fusarium. And that worked a little bit. But then, under the inspiration of Tim LaSalle, who was then the CEO at Rodale, and working with Elaine Ingham and other scientists at Rodale, we decided to do some soil carbon testing as we started to hear about regenerative agriculture. And what we found in our epiphany is that the area of the farm that we were managing had the lowest levels of soil organic matter. This is even though we were both certified organic and biodynamic, we were damaging our soil. The area of the farm that was next best, that was improved, was the area that our cows were managing. And then the best land at our farm was on the borders, on the periphery that nature was managing. And that led us fully into the next level of our understanding of regenerative agriculture, which is let's farm in a way that biomimics, that is in accordance with the natural tendency of our ecosystem. So now this was a drone image a few weeks ago of what is a newly established cacao plantation or field at our farm. And we use the terminology, everybody has different terminology, whether it's syntropic or agroecological or analog forestry. We actually are following specifically the recommendations of syntropic agriculture. It works so well in the neotropics. And the idea here is that in every square meter, we may have 20 or 30 different plants at work, collaborating, synergizing. The more biodiversity above ground, the more biodiversity, as Drew indicated, below ground. And it's that ballet of above ground biodiversity and below ground biodiversity that is phenomenally enriching our yields and our soils. So that's our progression. Always been organic, definitely have embraced biodynamic practices, but now we've got this new layer of practice and of goal, which is to enhance the ecosystem through regenerative agriculture using biodiversity as our tool.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tom, for taking us through that. Farm looks gorgeous. My next question is for Marshall, and looking at 70% of our arable farmland globally is used as grazing land and rangeland versus cropland, which is 30%. Can you talk about the importance role of livestock production and ranches can play in carbon sequestration and mitigating climate change?
Absolutely, Ryland, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks for putting this together. You know, the number one thing I have to always remind myself is that ranchers are kind of already playing a critical role in sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere. Here in the Northern Great Plains, I'm in North Dakota, grass-based soils are at this very moment sequestering vast amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere, locked away deep underground in the root systems and the soils here under grassland. So conservation efforts aimed at supporting ranchers and landowners who are eager to conserve the grassland ecosystem and all of its wonder are kind of the foundation. It's very critical. In fact, the World Wildlife Fund in 2016 did a study called the Plowprint and it showed that the grasslands loss in the US between 2009 and 2015 led to the emission of 3.2 billion metric tons of carbon into the atmosphere. There are no smoke plumes or factories or anything like that to kind of point a finger at. It kind of happens silently when grasslands are turned over. That's equivalent to 670 car emissions. So conserving grasslands and animal agriculture is mission critical. And the key to that is supporting ranchers, supporting landowners. We have a saying in grassland conservation community, no cow, no grass, no birds. And birds are the prism through which we at Audubon view our work, and birds take us to the places and the people that we work with through programs like our bird-friendly regenerative certification, the Conservation Ranching Initiative. And so it's all about empowering ranchers, bringing science to the table to help ranchers prove out these methodologies, and they're eager to do so. Now, the exciting potential of regenerative agriculture from my standpoint, when I look at the different approaches and certifications, from the regenerative organic certification to the savory land to market to our conservation ranching initiative, the potential is to unlock the full abilities and potential of farmers and ranchers growing food and also trapping additional carbon underground. And we certainly don't want to get out above our skis or in front of our skis in terms of the science. We want to grow with the science. But these practices and ranchers leading these practices, whether it's through regenerative bird-friendly grazing systems or cover cropping, or on the farming side, no-till farming, further exploration of perennial grains as a part of the future of food. I think it's incredibly exciting, but, and I'm going to say this, I may be a bit redundant, it all really matters. When I think about regenerative agriculture, first and foremost, I think about native ecosystem, and I think about native flora and fauna. But a part of that is the treatment of the animals, the treatment of the folks that are at if COVID has shown us anything, it's how important the people that are at the front of the line in terms of our food system, whether it's meat packing plants or farm service workers, taking care of them because they take care of us in the most critical times is really important and should be a part of regenerative agriculture. And absolutely taking care of and helping facilitate the improvement of lifestyle for farmers and ranchers. So at the core, whenever we do our conservation work, as Audubon, and I know I can speak for a lot of our partners, the farmers and the ranchers, they are the key to unlocking the full potential of regenerative agriculture, along with consumers who can be a part of an incredible revolution here over the next coming years. So farmers and ranchers, critical to all of this, and really the lifeblood of what we do at Audubon.
Thank you so much for that, Marshall. It looks like we lost our moderator, Ryland, briefly with this is the fun of Zoom 2020, but I'm Diana Martin. I'm with Rodale Institute, and I'm just gonna jump in and keep the panel rolling. So I actually, I really appreciate that response, Marshall. My next question is gonna be for Alex. Alex, I'd love for you to talk about Guayaki's commitment to regenerative organic agriculture and hear a bit more from you about what that looks like on the ground. And how do we avoid corporate greenwashing around the term regenerative? I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about there.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tommy, too, for making the introduction to Rodale Institute, and Marshall, great also to hear you speak about, the role of birds and in this regenerative movement as well. so interesting, every aspect. And Drew, from your science background, it's just amazing. And Ryland, just that he's not here, but communicating to everyone, you know, the concept of, you know, how we can all be part of the regenerative movement. For Guayaki, I mean, I would define us as, what defines us is relationships, really, you know, relationships with the spirit of the yerba mate plant. And that is born with an act of love. I mean, it comes from the Guarani indigenous knowledge, really, and the legend that a young woman sacrifices her life to stay with the elders and with the sick that they died during the migrations in the forest. And as an act of love and gratitude, the spirit of the yerba mate plant becomes human to her. And she communicates all the knowledge of the plant and of what is her ecosystem that she interdepends so much on underground level, above the ground level. So we really believe that relationships for us is our strongest commitment. And so we work with indigenous communities and small farmers. They are really the stewards of the forest. And we like to go back to the Guarani, because the Guarani gives us so much knowledge. We are constantly looking for that indigenous knowledge that is our channel to the knowledge that the earth has to give us, right? And to find our role in as a species, and to work in harmony with the earth, because we are rivers, and we are forests, and we are plants, and we are soil. We don't have in our guts, you know, all this, you know, flora and fauna, I like to say it that way. And it, you know, if we take care of our own fertility in our guts, you know, it changes our mindsets. And that's easy to do. We can eat fermented foods. We can eat organic regenerative foods, support the system that is actually generating a healthy living system where we're all part of. So that's the reason why we always felt that we're just a channel as a business. Guayaki is a channel that represents the commitments that we have with the stewards of the land. And back in 10 years ago, we did a commitment to regenerate 200,000 acres, and we met it for 2020. This is the year, and we actually surpassed it. And also to work with 1,000 families, and we're in 850. We're not quite there, but it's increasing. You know, it's this movement is really becoming an emergent that comes from the bottom up. I mean, everyone realizes that this is healthy for us as a species, and it's healthy for our ecosystem, you know. And like Tommy in Newmark already has said in the past, you know, diversity is the new currency. And I really believe that. I really think that for Guayaki, we are just this channel that connects consumers, that connects the government, NGOs, indigenous knowledge with the animals and the birds that are regenerating. Also, they're the great regenerators of the animals in the forest too, the tapirs, the anteaters, the birds. They're amazing regenerative agents, you know, unbelievable. And so this relationship in the soil, then you see it, and you see also in the micro level, you know, with this dynamic succession of symbiotic relationships among the mycorrhizas, that it's exchanging, you know, carbon for potassium with the plants. So that diversity that the yerba mate plant is showing us, that where she loves to live, her home is the forest. We're just learning from her. We're just listening more and more about her. And she's amazing. You know, you have to realize that most of the yerba mate, it's grown in a conventional way with Roundup in a monoculture format where land has been deforested. So what we focused on is in regenerating back the forest in these massive cultivations of sun-grown yerba mate, no? And those real agents are the ones that we can find in nature, the birds, the tapirs, you know, and they're so good at it. And we're learning as the days go by every day. So it's just fascinating observations that we need to make and be present there in the farms, and together with the farmers, we only are sharing the dreams and sharing the challenges and sharing the opportunities and really sharing it through the yerba mate plant, you know, and working together to regenerate back life. And I think really, I mean, regenerative is one of the definitions that I like from Daniel Wall and Friedhof Capra, is that it's that capacity of change to sustain life, you know, and in every level, in our minds, in our spirits, and in our bodies. And that will expand in our farms, and it will expand in our ecosystems locally, regionally, and globally. Yeah. How do we prevent or avoid greenwashing? I think we need to embrace uncertainty once and for all, you know, and not be afraid of it. You know, there's obviously different elements that we can design regenerative cultures, you know, with that plural S in cultures, like Daniel Wall clearly defines it. So we don't fall into one way of regenerating, one colonialism, one dualistic lineal way of doing it, but opening it up to all the different cultures, you know. And of course, we are part of the pilot project with ROC. We got the gold standard, and great. We've learned a lot. We are certified fair trade. We're certified organic. We're certified biodynamic, and we experimented that in one small piece of property next to the Iguazu National Park that belongs to our foundation called the Iguazu Agroecology Foundation. But now we realize that we want to expand that in Paraguay, in Brazil, in the whole ecoregion where the yerba mate is native to. And I think that would be obviously a way to distinguish ourselves. But I think it's not so much on a dualistic competitive mindset, but it's really for us to be channels and to share, you know, our regenerative experience with others.
Thank you so much, Alex. One thing Alex mentioned was ROC, which is the Regenerative Organic Certification. We'll get into that a little bit more later on, but I see our fabulous moderator, Ryland, is back, so I'm going to hand the reins back over to him, and I think he'll be jumping in with a question for Congresswoman Pingree.
Yeah, excuse my total departure. All power went out in my house, and I had no power and was panicking because I couldn't get back into the panel, so I had to go through my phone. So I hope my connection is still okay and you could hear me. And thank you, Alex. I caught the last half of your answer for that question. So Congresswoman Pingree, you've been an organic farmer since the 70s. What role should the federal government play in increasing regenerative and organic farming in our country?
Well, thanks for having me as part of a panel, and to other great panelists. It's really wonderful to hear all the work that you're all doing, and to everybody who's watching, thanks for your interest in all of this. You know, that's a big, long question, and I feel very fortunate to be on the policymaking side. Having been, as you mentioned, I got interested in organic farming as a back to the lander in the 1970s, and do the math, that was a really long time ago. And I continue to live in the same place that I did back then, and have continued working in agriculture in one way or the other, but now I get to work on the policy side as well. So it's an important connection to me. And, you know, just kind of based on this conversation, to put it in perspective, we need it all. We need policymakers, we need federal and state government to make the kind of change that we know we need to have happen right now. We need the work of, farmers who are moving forward with new ways and traditional ways of doing things and looking at how we can do it better. And we need the activists who really care about these things, the consumers who are demanding that we care more about the land and care more about the kind of food that they're putting in their bodies. And we need the USDA, we need Congress, we need, we need us all to be working on this, particularly given the real challenges facing us in the future with how our supply chain works, with climate change right around the corner, and with the amazing partnership we can have with agriculture if we do it right. And, we've heard about the statistics that Drew has worked on, and we all know the reasons why we have to be doing this. So I've been in Congress for a while, and I was a state legislator before that, and I've tried to keep my focus on, I've always been a certified organic farmer, so I've been a true believer in the importance of having organic matter in the soil and the resilience creates, but also the healthier crops, the healthier working place for people and better food to be eating. And now I think we're talking much more at this level about how to scale up all these things, whether it's organic or regenerative, all these ways that we have to think about the importance of farmers being partners in climate change, whether it's in permanent grassland or perennial grains, or just understanding better how to sequester carbon in the soil at a scale that we haven't been doing before. I'm a Congresswoman. I've sat on the Agriculture Committee. I'm on the Agricultural Appropriations Committee, where we decide for funding. And I worked on a bill in the last couple of years that I call the Agriculture Resilience Act. And it's one way to focus our attention on some of the things that we know are critical: research, soil health, farmland preservation, farmland viability, pasture-based livestock, renewable energy on farms, and food waste. And that certainly doesn't incorporate everything, but it's my way of trying to put into policy, how do we support these activities that we want to see more of? And you can't do that without a partnership with the USDA. In fact, many of the really helpful programs are based at the USDA. The NRCS, which was created back after the Dust Bowl, is one of the most important ways we can direct our resources and technical assistance so that farmers, perhaps who want to transition or want to do more of this, have that ability to do more of it. And there are a whole variety of other programs. There are a lot of incentives. As we know, we write a farm bill every 5 years, and I'm sure everybody on this screen and probably who's watching this call would say, the USDA has spent too many years and the Congress using the wrong kinds of incentives, which increased monocropping, which got much more vertical integration and corporate ownership of our farming systems, took away incentives from small farmers and gave them to big farmers and farm consolidation. And there's just a lot of big picture policies that we are trying to change. But one way to go about doing that is by putting the incentives in exactly the places we want to be, making sure that crop insurance and things where farmers get subsidized is really based on how are you growing, how are you growing what you're growing? How are you taking care of the soil? How are you, measuring in your soil the biodiversity or the carbon that you put together? So, I consider this really important, and I can, I won't take up the whole call, but I can talk about it more later. But that's really my focus. And we have good USDAs, and then we have not very good USDAs. And one of the roles of a policymaker is deciding where the funding goes and what programs get put into the Farm Bill and emphasized. And sometimes you're swimming upstream doing that, but I actually think that we're hitting a moment in time where there is a convergence of consumers and activists and farmers and researchers, and frankly, this big picture of climate change coming together, where we're going to be talking even more about, how do we make some significant changes here? And again, like the USDA has to be a partner. Well, anyway, like I said, I could go on forever, but it's a really important part of our duty, and it's the kind of things that we work on every day. And it's everything from the reason I got interested in this as a back to the lander and, wanted to live more sustainably on the land and grow my own food, and studied under Elia Coleman and, learned about the important principles of what we're all doing to thinking about it in how do we do this in a way that impacts the entire world? Because if we don't, we don't have a future. So it's a really, really important role.
Thank you, Congresswoman. My next question is for Dr. Smith. Some people have criticized the regenerative agriculture movement for presenting the silver bullet solution to climate change and ignoring some of the obvious needs for fossil fuel reductions, ending deforestation. How important are the changes in food and in farming to reverse the climate crisis? And how does regenerative agriculture fit into that larger picture?
Right, thanks, Ryland. Yeah, I think that everybody that that I know or that studies this really isn't ignoring the fact that we need other sectors in society to make changes to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in order for us, our globe to get in balance. But when you look at solutions that are, scalable and ready to go right now, we don't have to wait for new technology. And some of the practices and methods in regenerative and organic agriculture have been practiced for centuries or millennia. We just need to tap into that knowledge that we already have. So I think it's critically important because then that's why we put out our white paper to highlight the fact that regenerative agriculture as a solution for climate change. If we all shifted or made a dramatic shift now, we could have tremendous impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions over the short period of time. But we also recognize that most soil scientists recognize or pointed out that there's a saturation point. We can't just continue to keep pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it in the soil. There'll become a point where the soil can only take up so much. And so we are gonna need other solutions than just regenerative agriculture to get us there. But I think we're ready to go now. And I'll also say that others on this call or on this panel talked about different forms of agriculture. Some of what we looked at is very grain based, even though it encompasses a large part of the cropland. I think there's a lot of work to be done on these different forms of agriculture that probably have the potential to, like Tom's farm that he showed us and the work that Alex is doing and Marshall as well, are certainly a lot different than just our standard row crop agriculture. So, a lot of our study and a lot of our understanding of soil sequestration is coming from row crop agriculture. So I think that probably we haven't even really scratched the surface as to the benefit to the climate crisis that agriculture could be playing if we shifted to more diverse systems like these multi-strata and putting things like agroforestry and alley cropping, where we have much more diverse systems than we have now. So I still think that even though it could be a shorter term solution, it'll continue to be a solution, not even just for climate change, but for improvements in ecosystem services. And that's really something that Rodale Institute has always thought. If you look, a lot of people will say, well, agriculture is, we're one of the biggest polluters of water, one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. We put over 5.6 billion pounds of chemicals into the environment. So, certainly agriculture is a contributor to problems, but at Rodale Institute, really from the beginning, we've thought that agriculture could be a solution to a lot of these issues and actually improve. And that's really where that word regeneration comes from, right? That we actually are improving the soil, we're improving the ecosystem, we're improving our communities, and we'll continue to believe that agriculture plays a large role, or can play a large role in that.
Quick question on the saturation. I know obviously there's different soil types all around the world and different, water ecosystems, and, rainfall and moisture obviously plays a big part of soil's ability to continue to sequester and hold more carbon. But looking at grasslands like, the center of this country, and I know there's there's areas where there's 5 and 6 and maybe even 10 feet of topsoil generated from millennia of grazing bison. How do you, were those soils saturated, or those soils continued to build soil organic matter deeper and deeper based on perennial grass systems pumping carbon way down that continues to stack up? How do you understand that?
Yeah, that's something that I think we're really starting to understand, because there wasn't a lot of really good, especially not really good long-term data looking at soil carbon sequestration in grazing systems. A lot of it came, like I said, from row crop agriculture, things like the Rothamsted study in England, or from the Morrow plots in Illinois, and it just looked like there was always this point where you couldn't increase more carbon in the soil, and there's a lot of understanding for that. As you increase more carbon in the soil, you tend to increase microbial activity, which is a benefit for crop production, and but also that increased microbial they consume carbon as a food source, just like we consume carbon. So it seems like as you increase the microbial communities, they kind of come up to this saturation point. But newer studies now, especially looking at grassland agriculture, looks like we haven't really seen that curve flattening out. And I'd also say that probably a lot of those studies also were probably in intensive tillage systems. So I think that if we can start to reduce tillage and integrate livestock properly into these systems, we probably could. And when we're looking at that at Rodale, we've our neighbors are all around 2% organic matter. We've been able to get our farm up to about 5 to 6% organic matter, but we don't think we can get it to like 9 or 10 until we put some animals back on the ground, or we have more diversity, like through agroforestry, silvopasture, some of those practices. So I hope that answers it.
Yeah, thank you so much. My next question is back to Alex. What are you hearing from consumers about regenerative farming? And what do you think is the responsibility of consumers and brands in increasing regenerative agriculture and regenerative organic production?
Well, Ryland, this has a lot to do with the organization. I mean, when we share, news about our partnerships with Kiss the Ground or Pioneers, and we see a really positive praise from consumers. I mean, they really like to hear that. We even see it within our company. We've done recently a survey, and we got a really high score. 97% of our employees are really very happy with working in Guayaki because of the purpose that it has. So really, I think it's key for all the stakeholders, like Congresswoman has just shared too, that we all need each other. I mean, here we have to do it together. We're going through a system change, and if we want to create system change, and that's the reason why Guayaki is in business too, we need everyone. We need businesses, brands, with a shared vision and mission, and learn from each other, and not from a competitive and dualistic linear way of thinking, but from a systemic way of thinking, right? And that is, a big challenge, because we don't have that mindset. But I think we're starting to understand that we need to go into a systemic approach here, counting on everyone to really bring the change.
Speaking of which, I think we did a collaboration that went up in Portland today for World Soil Day with a big billboard, Guayaki Kiss the Ground, save our soil, join the regenerative movement. I saw that this morning, which was awesome. Yeah. Beautiful. Another question for Congresswoman Pingree. So we have a change in our administration coming up in January. How will this impact efforts around climate change and other food policy? And what bills should we look out for? And what bills, is there any bills that the regenerative agriculture movement can really rally behind to support policy change at a federal level?
Great. Well, I mean, I think we're on the edge of a dramatic change, and we don't have to rehash the entire administration that is just ending its term, but I think we all know that this was not an administration that had that believed in climate change, and in fact, generally took a tack to be anti activities related to climate change. And it went pretty far in terms of, nothing was allowed to be on a website that said climate change. All of the entities that were going on related to climate change and science-based entities, whether it was EPA or USDA or the Department of Interior, were removed and employees were removed. And further than that, a lot of the data and research that have been going on that's particularly important to collect was stopped at the USDA. The entire department of NIFA ERS was decimated and moved to Kansas City, and the majority of the scientists left their jobs. So I just want to put it in the perspective that we've lost a lot, even in 4 years. And it's really important that we make this transition. And I think we're really fortunate that, times have changed to a certain extent. I don't think you could have any administration that didn't go in with some focus on climate change, just because the pressure from the public and our knowledge of it is growing. But also, this is an administration that's said from the start, and in a lot of their proposals have talked about climate change. They have a report, Climate 21, and their section specifically on agriculture addresses a lot of the things that we're talking about today. Rebuilding the climate hubs, which were an important way for the USDA to work together, sort of cross-section. Those are they're contained within the forestry department, so continues to make that connection that people have been talking about with silviculture, keeping agriculture and forestry together. Since I come from the most forested state in the nation, we care deeply about the natural solution of sequestering carbon in trees and tree growth, but also in the connection with agriculture and forestry. But further than that, even in their initial policies have talked about using existing funding to do a variety of things, putting back a lot of things that have been taken away, science, data, creating a carbon bank, which is, a topic people are getting increasingly interested in, is how do we acknowledge and possibly have markets for sequestering carbon in the soil, just in the way that we have markets now where foresters are rewarded for the work that they do, and is that potentially an opportunity for farmers? And so much work has to be done around the measurements, the standards that get used. How do we all agree on the same kind of system? So I think we're going to have a dramatic difference. Not to mention, we're going to have new people in place. There'll be a new Secretary of Agriculture. There'll be new people filling a lot of the positions, both there and at the EPA and other science-related organizations that are in the federal government. And maybe most of all, I think that we as a culture have gone through a little bit of a shift during this pandemic. And we can kind of look at the differences that some people have around it, but this has shaken our country to the core. And people are deeply moved by the fact that we're going through something that is completely out of our control. And I truly believe that when we get on the other side of this, and this new administration will have the opportunity to deal with this, we're going to understand a little bit better that science and data matter, that having a government that does things to keep you safe and that deals with proactive planning around data and science. When somebody tells you something really bad is going to happen, you have to listen to them. And, that's what we're going to see with climate change. And I think it's going to impact a lot of the policies that we're able to, convince our colleagues to go ahead with, that we're able to get funding for. So it's going to make a big difference. There are lots of good bills. Congress, because we start over again, every 2 years. Once we have a re-election, then we get sworn in on January 3rd, then all bills are old and we have to bring them back again. So there are a lot of good pieces of legislation out there, and many more that will be introduced or they will be reintroduced. So I'm happy to provide a link about some of the bills that I think are already great. Of course, my bill is brilliant, the Agriculture Resilience Act, that really looks at many of the things that we're talking about. But that's really because I put a lot of focus on it, and I'm one of the few people who's geeky enough to really have a big interest in this. But I have a lot of colleagues who are co-sponsors of that who have written other bills related to carbon markets, soil health, soil sequestration, a lot of bills around equity in farming. How do we make sure that socially disadvantaged farmers have a seat at the table again? How do we make sure that this is affordable to more people? How do we include Native Americans? Just sort of how do we pull a lot of our systems back together? And lastly, I would say, one thing that will be different about this administration, I think we'll see more legislation about it. It's creating a USDA. Some people have talked about this should be a Department of Food. 85% of the budget of USDA goes into food and nutrition programs, SNAP, WIC, the things that try to keep people healthy. And if one thing we've also experienced during the pandemic is there are people going hungry everywhere, and there are hogs who are being slaughtered because we don't have the capacity to deal with them, or crops that are plowed under because our entire system is so poorly designed to deal with the world that we live in now. So I think you'll see a lot more to push the USDA to have a better acknowledgement around this is about food and how people get fed, and healthy food to people wherever you live and whatever economic situation you're in. It's about making sure that everybody has an opportunity to farm who wants to be in the farming business, that there's more equity to people who work as agricultural workers. One of the things you mentioned in my bio, I've worked on a bill called the Produce Prescription Program. That's how do you make sure that we understand that, food is all about your health too, and how is that incorporated into this? It doesn't do any good just to make sure you can consume calories if we're giving people over-processed foods, or we're giving them the kinds of foods that don't make them healthy. But a lot of people aren't either in a situation where they can access fruits and vegetables, or they can afford fruits and vegetables. And there's a lot of bills and legislation that have been written to deal with that. Produce prescription is one, to make sure that we understand that from a very early age, you gotta make sure everybody has access to healthy food. There's a lot of really great things that are gonna happen, I think, in the coming year, between having a new administration and having a Congress that has a different level of focus on this. So like I said, we're going to have all new bills in January and starting next year, but I'm happy to supply a link so people can see what to watch for.
One follow-up question, Congresswoman, is has there ever been any historical precedent for the general public rallying behind some initiative within the Farm Bill and that actually making a difference? So I'm just curious. I think there's a new Farm Bill in 2024, and do you see there is an opportunity for the general public to, create a voice towards something happening, shifting in that Farm Bill that could make a difference?
I think absolutely. And I think a lot of the change that we're experiencing is both driven by consumers, because markets are changing. People are, just the entire market for organic food is so much greater than it was, when I got started in 1970 or even 20 years ago. And that tends to just shift how we make policy when we see what consumers are buying. The market is extremely important, but also people's activism and, just sort of going back to the basics. It really helps to call your member of Congress and tell them that these are issues that you care about. Write them a letter, send them an email, go and meet with them, talk about your own farm and how you what makes money on your farm and what you're doing. And often it's something that members of Congress aren't opposed to. It's not necessarily a very partisan issue, but they don't hear about it a lot. So to them, for a lot of members, it's just like, well, I'm there to fight for the price of cotton, but I didn't know that there was, a big organic farm in my district that's got some other needs that I'm not paying any attention to. The last example that I experienced was when I came into Congress, when the big fight around GMO labeling was going on. And in my first couple of years, we were flooded with so many calls about that, and letters and emails. And maybe people in my state were slightly more interested, but I think it was true of a lot of my colleagues. And I think one of the reasons it was so much interest, there was so much interest, was because finally people found something that they could email their legislator about related to food, but they hadn't heard about a bunch of other things that they could also do. They didn't know about all the other, 10 wonderful bills to care about. And labeling of food and GMO labeling is a good, important topic. And it created an awful lot of activity around Congress, trying to decide what to do, and especially from people who thought they never had to pay attention to these issues. So There is a huge role for the public in demanding the kind of food system that you want, or the kind of, agricultural system. There's just a huge role. Sometimes the biggest challenge is, how do we let people know when the Farm Bill is coming together and what pieces of it are there for them to lobby about? But I think all the organizations that are represented here are going to have that opportunity, and I think we're going to probably start work on the 2023 Farm Bill earlier than we normally would, because we have a new administration and we have so many things going wrong related to food and agriculture in our country that there'll be an interest in starting early on it.
Wonderful. Yeah, we were collaborators on a website called Soil Action Policy .org, and you basically can go there and anyone can tweet or send a letter with a pre-written letter about that you care about soil and regenerative agriculture as a climate solution. So we can put that in the chat, and people can take action that way as well. My next question is back to Marshall. You lead the Audubon's bird-friendly regenerative conservation ranching initiative. And you've also been part of the new pilot certification for the ROC, the Regenerative Organic Certification, which is like the Audubon program, including high standards for biodiversity, soil health, animal welfare, farm worker fairness. What have you learned in your exploration and process of participating in those two programs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one thing I've learned and that I'm excited about is it works. We have a crisis that we are working to address as it relates to diminishing grassland birds, and everything cascades from that. It begins with how we treat our soil, but as Audubon, we look at it through the prism of birds. And when grassland birds are declining, we're seeing native bee populations declining, pollinators declining. Our rivers, streams, and tributaries are more polluted than ever. And birds are the songstresses and troubadours of the skies. And the silent spring that Rachel Carson spoke about, well, it's here. In some ways, she was criticized for being too alarmist in her writing, and within a short period of time, our skies are falling silent. And so it works. Regenerative agriculture works, and the science proves it. And at Audubon, we're a science-based organization. Our millions of members and supporters demand that of us. And I know how important it is to the Regenerative Organic Alliance and the ROC certification, Elizabeth and her team. The bird-friendly regenerative approaches that we've taken with regards to conservation ranching, we track the bird responses. We track and will be tracking the soil health and soil carbon responses. So one of the things I've learned first and foremost is it works. We're a traditional environmental conservation organization, so food hasn't always been what we've done, quite honestly. And I go to a lot of conservation, biodiversity conferences, and there's not a substantive discussion about food. I go to a lot of food conferences. There's not a substantive discussion around true biodiversity, healing, and management. And regenerative agriculture, I think, creates a place where we put all of those things at the table, and they're all equally important. The second thing that I've learned over the last 10 or 15 years has been how receptive and eager farmers and ranchers are to adopting these practices, and the ones that have already adopted these practices and have taught folks like myself, whether it's Jerry Doan and Dan Rasmussen, I can go on and on, how eager they are with sharing these practices with their neighbors. They want to change the world through regenerative food as much as anyone. The two main reasons I hear when I'm working with farmers and ranchers throughout the country, number one, they are legitimately concerned with being the best stewards of the land they can be. And regenerative ag practices, bird-friendly practices give them that opportunity. It empowers them with that. And regenerative practices open that door. Number two, yes, it can be more profitable, not merely through premiums. And believe you me, I wake up in the morning wanting to encourage people to pay more for people who can pay more for good food. But it's not just about premiums. It's about lowering the cost of inputs and the amount of money that farmers and ranchers shell out to produce food. So regenerative agriculture and the practices we support through our bird-friendly program, they help to do that. And farmers and ranchers are really eager to do that. And I think lastly, I think we can agree that one of our societal problems is that people are losing trust in institutions, agencies, movements, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things I've learned through being a part of and learning from regenerative agriculturalists is, how important the science is, how important tracking and proving and being skeptical of ourselves will be. And I think that's really important. If we saw a drop off in bird populations across the ranches that we work with, and we work with over 115 ranches and 2.5 million acres through the conservation ranching program, then we would have to say it's not working, despite our best intentions. But we're seeing the absolute opposite of that. Bird populations are responding, and that along the way is proving that this is working. And we know that science is also showing us that the practices that produce better results for birds also produce better results for soil and soil health, pollinators, rivers, streams, tributaries. So one of the things I've learned is that it does all matter, and we have to prioritize all of those elements of regenerative agriculture if we're going to be successful.
Thank you, Marshall. All right, we have about 22 minutes, and I know we have questions from the crowd. I have a few more questions. So to our panelists, let's see if we can be succinct. I'd love to get everybody to answer this question in kind of a couple, maybe a minute format or 2-minute format. The question for everybody is, what do you see is the biggest challenge and biggest opportunity for scaling regenerative agriculture as a climate solution? So let's start with Tom, and let's kind of do 2-minute kind of quick and concise responses, and then we'll get to some questions from our audience.
Ryland, this is World Soil Day, right? You introduced that. And World Soil Day is on December the 5th for a specific reason. It is the birthday of King Rama IX of Thailand, who died only 4 years ago. And King Rama IX was honored, memorialized by the United Nations. It was his birthday, which is the World Soil Day. And the reason why is facing a food crisis, facing a farming crisis in Thailand, he as king walked to every village and met the farmers where they were. And in honor of his devotion to the individual farmer, the world lionizes and celebrates him. That informs my perspective on how we scale, or I think a better term is how we encourage replication, because scaling implies size. There are 570 million farms, at least, on the planet. There are more than 2 billion farmers. It is not one size fits all. We cannot go to them and in an edict say, you must do these practices. We have to meet the farmers where they are. So my response to you is that we need to leave the vanity of our privileged US position and recognize that for Drew Smith's thought experiment, as you described it, Drew, in the new Rodale white paper to work, we have to enroll a substantial amount of the global acreage in regeneration. And we can do that by reaching out to farmers where they are. That's what our work is with the carbon underground in Thailand, for example. We are working with millions of farmers through the government, and we're not telling them what practices they have to do. We're managing for outcomes, for ecological outcomes. So I think I'm inspired by King Rama IX to meet the farmers everywhere around the world where they are.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tom. Beautiful. Let's hear from Dr. Smith.
Sure. Thanks, Ryland. One thing we really focus on is transitioning farmers to organic agriculture. And we always struggle to understand, because every single economic model and study that we've done shows that organic farmers and organic systems are more profitable. And we wonder, why aren't more people doing this if they're going to be more profitable, considering a lot of farmers are struggling financially. And I think that's it. It's the financial risk that farmers have to bear. They're kind of said that they have to feed the world, but we try to tell them you just need to feed your family. And so I think that what barrier there was, but it's starting to be removed, is financial, loans, investing in regenerative agriculture. And probably the other thing that was a barrier, I think used to be a barrier, was industry that didn't want regenerative or organic agriculture to expand. It was a threat to their business model, but it's no longer a threat to their business model. It's actually part of their business model. And so they're now prepared to throw money or start to invest in the systems. And then that will, advance regenerative agriculture. And I think that's probably driven a lot by consumer demand. So some of the things that were barriers, I think we're right at this, precipice of change where those barriers are broken down, and we're going to see, real acceleration of regenerative agriculture.
Beautiful. Thank you. Let's go to Alex. What do you see as the biggest challenge and opportunity for growing, expanding regenerative agriculture as a climate solution?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge might be just the mindset, just having, a brought up or directed mindset of independency being, our solution to freedom and to really aspiration as a species. I think that is our biggest challenge. I mean, the opportunity that we have ahead here, and the planet is showing us that it's becoming really small, and we're seeing it in the butterfly effect, is that really we will find freedom through interdependence. On the contrary, I mean, if we're working in a farm and treating it as a living system and as an ecosystem, we have to realize that we're interdependent with another ecosystem that's miles away, such as maybe the Amazon, that's generating all this water vapor and through the sky rivers. And we're so dependent on this water in another ecosystem in the Atlantic forest. So that interdependence, it's key for us to just value it and generate more value in interdependence, cultural interdependence, to not only looking at it from an ecosystem, but also from the knowledge of the indigenous people who have farmed for thousands of years, such as in the Amazon. And it's a big garden. The Amazon, the carbon, it just shows us that the carbon circle is there through biochar. You can see it. These are civilizations that have been working together with nature for thousands of years, and that knowledge is key to tap into. That's what we're doing. We're sort of like working and valuing the interdependence of ecosystems. We need the water from the Amazon, so we're working with Gaia Amazon with 25 million hectares of land being stored by the indigenous knowledge, by their knowledge, traditional knowledge that they've done so incredibly well. So I think that's the great opportunity that we have, and that we are awakening as a species and knowing that we really depend upon each other.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alex. How about Congresswoman Pingree?
Great. Well, I agree with everything people have already said. I guess my biggest worry around making these kinds of changes is that time is running out, and we have an awful lot of things to do with, I think, a lot of external pressure on us as our climate changes more quickly every day, and many of these solutions have to be in place, have to be working for us to really, have a healthy planet going into the future, and have enough resources to continue to use. The resistance, as people have mentioned, I mean, on the one hand, nobody likes change, period, and it's hard to resist change. Also, the food and agriculture lobby has more resources than the defense lobby in Washington and across the country. So sometimes the resistance, has a lot of funding behind it. On the positive side, I think Drew mentioned it, it's even within many of the, corporate entities, they're seeing the consumer demand change. People are starting to say, I'm not going to eat this soybean if it was grown in the Amazon by taking down rainforests. I'm not going to eat this hamburger if it's, if animals aren't treated well or it's destroying our soil. So, that consumer demand is pushing a lot of companies to rethink how they're doing things and how things are grown. And that's just critically important. And I think that's hitting a sort of tipping point. I also think that having a new administration that has a different outlook. Tom was talking about the international international challenges around this. Well, to have a new era where we rejoin, the climate change goals of the UN, the World Health Organization, the World Food Organization, where the Paris Accords matter, where we're actually talking to countries all over the world, where we're increasing foreign aid and not using it as a blunt object to force countries to take their practices down to our level. Something we've also used trade agreements to do when they call them harmonizing the regulations. What they're often saying is, we're going to take good practices that are used in other countries, and we're going to take them away if you want to buy our products, because we don't want your agriculture to be better than our, I'm getting in the weeds here. But anyway, I just think having a different view of international relationships and our role in the world will help. And then probably lastly, just climate change too is also a positive, because when you sort of look down the road and you see time is running out, it requires you to say, hey, let's not just think about that for the next 5 years. We better hurry up and do this stuff, or we won't have the options going into the future. And I think that's increasingly on people's minds.
Thank you. Marshall, last pass to you on this question. Biggest challenge and biggest opportunity for scaling regenerative ag?
Yeah, absolutely. And I so appreciate everyone's thoughts on this. I look at one of the biggest challenges I foresee is scaling with purpose and science. I think that's really important. When I think about regenerative agriculture, which is greatly influenced from indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, I think about balance. And so I always like to warn myself and warn my colleagues, don't succumb to the fear of the scale monster. The scale monster is, I think, how kind of we've gotten into this problem in the first place, thinking solely about growth and production and not about balance with the ecosystem, and making sure the ecosystem and our productivity doesn't break outside of those walls. I think that's really important as we think about the scaling this approach. Audubon, we are a bird conservation organization. And if we had just taken a singular focus on bird habitat, I think that with our conservation ranching initiative, and not worried about animal welfare, not worried about profitability, not worried about the chemical use, which is both bad for, or troublesome for the farmer in terms of buying those things and troublesome for the environment when used in abundance or recklessly. I think that we would not have been taking a truly regenerative approach. So one of the challenges or concerns I have is making sure that we keep everything at the table with equal importance. When I talk to bird conservation conventions, I like to talk about soil. I like to talk about pollinators. I like to talk about rivers and streams. We're talking about soil today. I want to make sure we're thinking about birds and thinking about biodiversity, and a part of building truly regenerative and biodiversity focused systems is making sure we're incorporating, whether it's full organic or at least incorporating a consideration around managing chemical use. I think that's truly important to being to scaling this movement. In terms of opportunity, I think it's as a conservationist and working for a organization that's been at this for 100 years, a lot of the work that we do, easements, cost share, different programs, they're done kind of out of the public view. Where people live in cities, most people live in cities the size of Omaha or bigger. They don't see that happen. They're not directly attached to it. So one of the big opportunities of regenerative agriculture is it can be a real transparent approach to energizing and mobilizing 300 million people here in the United States and billions of people globally, that every time that you check out a food, a banana or a beef product, et cetera, you could directly be influencing in a positive way ecological, environmental outcomes. I think that's an incredible opportunity of regenerative agriculture. If we keep our eye on the ball, it really allows for every day to be Earth Day. Every purchase, every decision to add up. There's an old saying that I'll leave you with. Every time you spend a dollar, you're casting a vote for the world in which you want to live in. I think putting the power into our purchases through regenerative agriculture, that's really the big win, big opportunity from my perspective.
Amazing. Thank you, Marshall. Yeah, so let's see. So I have two more questions that I wrote down that are really looking at more of the human. Oftentimes when we're talking about environmentalism and regenerative agriculture, we're talking about soil. I'd love to just address the question, and how can the regenerative agriculture movement shape a more equitable and diverse food system? And, you know, I'd love, yeah, I mean, Marshall, I'd just love to hear your perspective on that. Yeah, what do you see as the opportunity of how the regenerative agriculture movement can bring more diversity to who's farming and stewarding and, you know, shaping the future of how we're managing our land?
You know, it's a heavy question. It's a question and a topic that's very near and dear to me. Growing up in inner city Los Angeles, inner city Dallas, this type of new food, whole food, regenerative food movement is sometimes at arm's length to people that look like me. And so this question and topic is really important to me. I look at it as kind of the high approach, HAI. Number one, I think it's really important to honor the contributions of indigenous people, Black slaves that were incredible agriculturalists, innovators that developed approaches and practices that we might call regenerative today. I think honoring their contributions when we talk about and think about regenerative agriculture, I think that's in agriculture is kind of the first step, and we may not do that as well as we should. No, I'm going to go a little bit farther. We don't. And that means the conversations that we're having don't necessarily involve the people that reflect America as a whole. So I think being more honoring the contributions of, I think about grassland management, and we incorporate prescribed fire as a hallmark of proper grassland management. I'm going to go out on the limb and say that, I love Aldo Leopold. He probably didn't invent that approach. That was passed down through indigenous, traditional, ecological knowledge, trial and error. It may not look the same way as the information we get in our glossy PDFs through the modern scientific process, but it is influential and important, and we don't honor that as the way we should in regenerative agriculture. Number two, adopting. We kind of do this pretty well. We adopt the lessons from indigenous land managers and people of color and Black farmers and ranchers from many years ago, but we don't honor them. So honoring, adopting, and getting back to the basics at the heart of traditional ecologic knowledge is balance. And we're way out of balance when it comes to how we grow our food and how we manage natural ecosystems. And then when you honor and you adopt, I think it's really important to have those voices and those people at the table. And we can't do that unless we're very aggressive about bringing more people of color, Black and indigenous growers into the regenerative agriculture movement. And we have to be really intentional about it. We didn't get here by accident, and we won't get out of this by accident. And when we think about food, it's about stakeholders, it's about durable political will. And when we think about who votes today, there's a lot of strength and diversity. I think someone said it, Alex said it earlier, there's the greatest currency is diversity, and I agree. So that's how I see it.
Beautiful, thank you. I really, really appreciate you answering that question and giving us that context. I completely agree. Awesome, well, we're coming to the end of our time here, but I'd love to get some questions from the audience that have probably been coming in throughout this time. I know Tammy was gonna set me up with some questions, but I'm on my phone, so it's not as easy.
Are you able to see, are you in the Google Doc with the questions?
I'm on my phone because my power is still out at my house. So maybe actually it might be better to pop up those, maybe if someone else is able to look at those questions and pose them to the crowd. I just am on my phone and I'm not seeing the Q&A.
I'll just jump back in and help out with the audience Q&A.
That'd be amazing.
I want to thank
you.
all the people who attended. We had over 600 people attending live today. We had over 1,200 people registered for this panel. And I don't think I've ever seen a chat this active. We've gotten hundreds of comments and actually hundreds of questions. So I'm sorry that we're not going to get to them all today, but we will a follow-up email to everyone who's registered with some of the resources that people are asking about and some of the great links that people shared. Just seeing the limited time left, I think we should just maybe end with a recurring question that came up from a lot of people. Basically, we've talked a lot today about brands, policymakers, farmers, but our attendees want to know what they can do at home as gardeners, homeowners, constituents, citizens, consumers. What advice do you have for everyone viewing today about how they can take positive action against the climate crisis and support the growth of the regenerative organic movement?
Let's see. So I'll just chime in with one thing from Kiss the Ground, the organization. We've been working about 3 or 4 years on a program called Find Your Path, where anyone can go to our website as a consumer, a teacher, a concerned citizen, mom, a policymaker, write in what you do, what your interests are, and it's like a little wizard that pops you back some actions that are Kiss the Ground focused, as well as the broader regenerative agricultural movement and other organizations that are working. So go find your path at kisstheground.com as one way. And then I know something that the Rodale Institute created, which was an amazing purchasing guide for how to purchase food at the grocery store, really thinking through regenerative agriculture. So those are my two little ads, and I'll throw it to Tom.
Well, the Carbon Underground, which is www.thecarbonunderground.org, has an Adopt a Meter program where people can contribute to the Adopt a Meter program, and we support the conversion of degraded land worldwide to regenerative. We work with the Savory Institute. We work with many of, obviously with Kiss the Ground. So that's another opportunity for people to directly contribute to the conversion of land to regenerative.
Alex?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, through Guayaki, we are a channel, and we are a channel for artists, for musicians, for, you know, different ways to really enter into the regenerative paradigm in the spiritual and in the individual and as a community and as a farmer. So we welcome everyone to really voice out and participate and together with us and use us as a channel to learn more and how can we improve as a business and really take this movement globally and celebrating, you know, like Daniel Wall has described so well, is in this design, you know, there's not one answer. There's just a lot of questions that take us to answers and to more questions. So really we encourage everyone to help us in this movement, because it is I think it is a process that we're all learning, and we need everyone to participate.
Beautiful, thank you. Drew?
Sure, and I think Marshall already said, you know, vote with your food dollar is critically important. I might say, you know, I like what Tom said about scaling being replicating. So if we're going to replicate, that means we need to get a lot more people involved in agriculture. And right now in the United States, less than 1.5% of people are even involved in agriculture really in any way. It's not just farming. So consider yourself a farmer, and maybe there's a way that you can be involved, whether it's just a garden or a project. You know, get to know a farmer. If we talk about food and medicine. I know that wasn't the goal of this talk, but if you really think that, you know, how you eat is important, then maybe you should know something about where your food's grown and who actually grows it, or take an active role in it. Just like you probably know, or even take a interest in choosing who your doctor might be. Why not take an active role and maybe choose who your farmer is?
Thank you. Chellie?
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks again for doing this panel, and I echo much of what other people said. I think at all levels, I think more people should have gardens at their homes or community gardens in their backyard. I know during the pandemic, garden supply stores sold out of seeds and, you know, tools. It showed that people really wanted to do this when they were hunkered down, and I think it's something we should all continue, because it's a great connection to make, and it's good for your kids and your neighborhood. Absolutely buy your food locally if you can, or know what's in the brand that you're buying. Increasingly, even food from, you know, big businesses are being forced to list more about where the food was grown, or publish the supply chains for every possible element in the food. Know all you can about what you buy, because as Marshall said, how you spend your dollar is a huge political act. And I think we need to all do a lot to change this supply chain problem. And again, more that you can buy locally or, sign up for CSAs and farmers markets really, really helps those farmers who are trying to, become more part of the supply chain. And then, of course, from my perspective, it's really important to engage in food policy. Some cities and municipalities have sustainable food plans. Increasingly, even small communities are looking into like, what should our sustainable food future look like? Get to know your state legislatures. Often the state legislator or your Secretary of Agriculture is having a huge impact. Soil health has become a mantra for many state departments of agriculture. So get to know more about what they're doing and lobby your own legislature. And then, of course, Congress is going to have a huge impact on what we're doing internationally, domestically. We would just love people to speak more to their member of Congress. Doesn't matter what party, doesn't matter where you live. The fact that they find out that you're interested in these topics will make a huge difference when we're trying to move through the next farm bill and convince them to do the right things. If you go to my congressional website, it's Chellie Pingree, member of Congress in Maine. I can't remember, but just Google it, or we'll get to the link. We have a section on bills related to climate change and agriculture. And as I mentioned, they'll be changing, but it's not just the bill that I put out, but we try to list things that my colleagues are doing that we think are good and that are coming, many of them bipartisan, both sides of the aisle. So we're happy to keep people informed. I think we even have a newsletter. You can sign up if you want us to send you more stuff about what we're doing. But I think a lot is going to be going on in the next year or two. So it's a great time to start paying attention to the policy, political side of all this.
Thank you. Marshall, you want to close us out?
That's a big task. I really appreciate everyone partaking today. I would just encourage, as I often do, make every day your Earth Day. If you care about Earth, and we all should, find ways to make every day your Earth Day. And it could be through your purchasing power. I hope it always and absolutely is through your political power as individuals. I think through the, whether you live in an apartment or a home or what have you, finding a way to use native plants for birds to influence the management of your environment. It could be changing your lawn to native habitat. It could be having native plants on your apartment stoop, whatever it is. Try to make every day your own personal Earth Day. And in terms of purchasing, whether it's seeking out products that have Audubon's green seal or ROC's organic, regenerative organic certification, you name it, do your part if you can, when you can, to make every day your Earth Day. So I think many people have already done that. At least 1,200 people have already done that today by participating in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Marshall. Awesome. Well, wow, this has been such an extraordinary panel. Thank you for the Rodale Institute for hosting this. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and using your awareness and your attention on World Soil Day here to learn hopefully some new things about how we can play a greater role in the regenerative movement. And I really hope that people's hearts and minds have been touched today, and that we move forward with love and really understanding our interconnection with all life, and how do we start to behave and operate in the world, understanding that interconnection. And so I just really thank everyone for your unique contributions today. And it will, together we can do this. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we look forward to being in community at future events. Thank you so much.
And for everyone who was asking, we will share a recording of this panel as well as a copy of the chat. I know people dropped a lot of great links in the chat, so we'll save that. We'll send it to everyone who joined today, and we'll send you the contact of all the great people on the panel so you can stay in touch with their work and follow up with them.
Oh yeah, I had one announcement, which is the Rodale Institute and Kiss the Ground will be collaborating in one of the Rodale courses, Transition to Organic Certification course that will be released in mid-January, will be available both on Kiss the Ground's website as well as at the Rodale Institute. So we're thrilled to be helping get that education out there to more farmers to transition. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your contributions. Have a great rest of your day.